I think this music has an incredible potential. It's completely unknown of in the Western world. It's a very, you know, in Africa it's quite widespread. In Paris they know a little bit about it, but otherwise Congolese music, nobody really knows what it is. And there might be a number of reasons for this, but I just thought it's such a potential in there. I want to bring it out really. And then the idea developed into making a discotheque at the beginning, and then it evolved into making a discotheque, a bar, and a restaurant. And at this point, I needed some help. And then I found the help in the form of, you know, like it's a very big project. Many people have been working on it. But Reed and Clemens were among the first to step in and have contributed very substantially to the design of the Western section. Maybe I should very quickly speak about how this looks like. So this, as I said, a discotheque, a bar and a restaurant in London, in Islington, which is based on the idea to divide all the spaces to equal amounts in a Congolese section and in a Western section. This doesn't mean that the spaces are necessarily divided in two. They can be divided into more parts. Here on the left-hand side you see the discotheque, in the middle is the bar space, and on the right-hand side is the restaurant. And the entrance for the whole thing is in the middle for the bar space, so you come in and you have a space that is divided into 4 vectors. On the left-hand side, we'll show more images. There is a tile section, which is defined as a Western section. Then comes a Congolese slice with a shack-like bar and some plastic chairs. And then you have a Western slice with a very beautiful copper bar, and then again a Congolese slice. But if you sum these two together, then you have an equal amount of space. The same in the restaurant, where it's organized like a chessboard. So you have like a Congolese square and a Western square, Congolese square and a Western square. But again, it makes a half and half situation between the Western and the Congolese. And when they have the menu, you can on one side have a Congolese part, on the other side a Western part. You can choose, but you can order whatever you like. You can mix it on your table. And the discotheque has a line that is not so visible, but you see it in the space. It is all about the finish of the walls. So the Western walls on the left-hand side have a very proper finish. The Congolese walls on the right-hand side have a more rough finish. And then there's some details in there which we can go into, but maybe I shouldn't talk too long and give the microphone to Hans Ulrich.
No, it's great. We want to hear you more. I mean, the thing is, before we go into the details, and we should definitely go, you know, from the macro into the micro of this project and talk about, you know, the details. But before that, I wanted to ask you one more thing about collaboration, because one of the things which is interesting is that Douglas Gordon once said in the 90s that in our generation there is a kind of a promiscuity of collaboration, which was true. And you've worked a lot with other artists. You've worked with Philippe Pareno, with Maurizio Cattelan, with many other artists of your generation. And there seems to be something happening not only in your practice, but also with Philippe and, you know, Rickrit and many of the other artists of our generation, that maybe the promiscuity of collaboration continues, but maybe it's no longer just with artists, but it's happening now with designers, with architects. So that's one thing. And the other thing, that there seems to be a tendency or an urgency towards production of reality. And in some kind of way, the Double Club is not only an art project, but it also functions, as we can see in London. I mean, I live in London, and I found it very interesting how actually from an opening, which was a clearly art opening, I was there the first night, and there was the art world, and, you know, it was somehow a vernissage, and it kind of little by little gradually went into the reality. And today it's just really a club. It exists there out on the map. So these are maybe two more general questions before we then can go into the details.
Yeah, we're talking about collaboration. I think it's probably mainly about joining forces. It's about, you know, people who have special talents, special ways of working, to bring them together and make something together. The idea of the artist who's sitting more or less alone nowadays, often with some assistants in his studio, like Spitzweg, and, you know, going into himself, trying to express his very inner thoughts, is such an outdated idea. We don't really want to see that anymore. We have explored that to the maximum, I believe. But in a project of this scale, but also in many other projects, I think it's very good to join forces with other people who have a certain capacity, and together you just get much further than you can get alone. It's a very pragmatic approach, really. It's not a big philosophical thought behind it. And was war die andere Frage nochmal? Yeah, well, you know, I keep it short. But I made 2 projects before which were also like double clubs, but they happened in a museum context. One was in a place called Färgfabriken in Stockholm. It was an exhibition. It was called One Day, One Day. And the idea behind this exhibition was to show 2 works, 2 quite big works, substantial works, but to show only one work on one day, and then the next day you would see the other work. Well, these works were... We didn't tell anybody that there were 2 works. We just made 2 openings. We had like 2 different kind of press releases, and depending on which day you came, you would see either the one work, which was a big light installation, or the other work, which was also a big light installation, but quite different. That produced a certain amount of confusion, because people went to see the show, and they thought that they saw it, and they would maybe meet somebody else on the street and say, you know, like, what is classically happening? How did you like the Carsten Holler show? And then they talk about for a while, and after some time they realize they're not talking about the same show. So my real interest was actually to produce this enormous amount of confusion that you can have when, you know the situation. You're speaking about the film that you have seen at the cinema, and you think you speak about the same thing, but it's not the same thing. But this can be clarified. Here it was more, you know, a substantial confusion I was trying to create. And then there was another double project, which was called Une exposition à Marseille, a show in Marseille. It was happening at the museum in Marseille, and this show was completely symmetrical. So the whole museum it's already a very symmetrical architecture. But what you have on the right-hand side of the museum, you would also see on the left-hand side of the museum. We changed the entrance, so you would go in the middle, and then you turn, you know, in the middle there's some symmetrical works. Then you turn right, you see something, then you turn maybe to the other side of the museum, you see exactly the same thing, which is producing, of course, this feeling of being lost. You know, you're starting to distrust your own sense of orientation, which I don't have anyhow. And also this show, we had it running for 3 months. Then we closed it down, renovated it, and opened it again, the same show, again for 3 months. So it was also a double project. But both these double projects, One Day, and Une exposition à Marseille, were still in a museum context, and were therefore somehow representative, or, you know, if you want, metaphorical. Here, this is another situation, because it works in a very real-life bar, restaurant, and discotheque setup, and it makes that many people go there and they really give a shit about the art. All they want to have is a good evening with their friends, have a beer, and eat something, and maybe dance. And that works to the extent that I would even call it, this is only a 50% art project. It's less than a museum project, which is 100%, but it's very interesting to think about if this 50%, or this what I call the dirtification of the art, makes it not much more valuable, substantial, influential.